Hey, what's going on, ambitious family? In this video, I'm going to compare Supabase versus Firebase by showing you an example application that I've built that I've integrated with both database providers. Many of y'all ask which database is better for my use case. Some of y'all just fall into shiny object syndrome and you want to use one database over the other, maybe just because one is SQL and it looks like it can be more performant. But honestly, it really depends on various factors like your skill level, your comfort with working with data, how much experience you have with something like spreadsheets, or even as far down as to what type of thinker you are. If you're a more visual thinker or if you're a more data oriented and data driven thinker. So, what I'm showing you here is an example app that I've built as part of one of our courses at Ambitious Labs called No Code AI Pro, where we built out a AI chef assistant. Okay, so this app is integrated with Firebase. And since Flutterflow is a drag and drop no code tool that actually writes real Flutter code, Flutter is in fact a programming language that was developed by the Google team. So, as far as Flutter goes, Flutter's part of the overall Firebase or Google developer ecosystem. So, the Flutter language is built in that same design pattern that Firebase and that the rest of the Google developer kind of libraries and SDKs are built around. So because Firebase is a Google product, Firestore is a Google product, and Flutter itself is a Google product, all three of them were designed to work very seamlessly together. So when you think about what's going on under the hood, Flutter and Flutterflow have a very tight integration under the hood of Flutterflow here. So when you're working with Firestore from Flutterflow, notice that you actually already have a dedicated tab called Firestore. And when you go to create a new project from Flutterflow, you're actually taken through a setup that encourages you to start with Firebase. Like for example, if we go test new project here and we create blank, you'll actually see that setup Firebase is right here at the bottom. That's because Flutter as a framework and Flutter as a language is very tightly integrated and it works very, very well. So if you're a beginner or if you want as least problems as possible and you want to stay within the Flutterflow ecosystem for as long as you can, I highly recommend you start with Firebase. If you are comfortable working outside of the Flutterflow ecosystem and you see this as, an opportunity just for you maybe to build the UI in Flutterflow and then go out and create a separate database service that you'll maintain separately, then you could potentially think about Supabase. But the first question I would ask is, how familiar are you with the overall ecosystem of software development? Are you comfortable using a different front end and a different database and then solving problems where the two might not connect with each other, right? Because Flutter and Supabase are going to have a completely different integration under the hood when you think about the code than Flutter and Firebase. So, number one, your comfort level working outside of the Flutterflow ecosystem. If you're comfortable working outside the Flutterflow ecosystem, then you can think about Supabase. Okay, cool. So let's go back to that project that I just had open. And we'll explore some of the obvious differences between the both. So here, like I mentioned, Flutterflow already has an integration with Firebase. So as you can see here, this integration with Firebase allows me to quickly define what my database needs to look like. So I can say new collection, hit create, and I can actually just create collections. And collections are essentially buckets of data where you'll be storing the same type of data. Flutterflow even allows me to use AI features to generate a collection type, or I can start from scratch and build one out myself, where I have, ID, and we can have another field here for description, and we can essentially build out the shape and the structure of our database right here within our Flutterflow dashboard. So as you can see here, I've already designed the database for this application. This is an application that's part of our No Code AI Pro course where we teach people how to build their own AI-powered applications that they can design, build, launch, and monetize. It's kind of like an app called Virally that I built on the App Store that generates a few $1,000s of revenue every month, and we teach you exactly how to build that. But what I have here is a database that's already designed in Firebase. Next, we're going to recreate this exact application by connecting to Supabase and uncovering any obvious clunkiness or major differences in both integrations and finding out what's different along the way. So let's jump in and start by integrating our Supabase project. We'll head over to settings and find Supabase. That would ideally be under integrations here. We'll enable Supabase, and then let's go back to Supabase to find our API URL. I'll head over to the dashboard where I've actually already created a project for this clone. Then I will scroll down to find my project URL. I'm not worried about y'all seeing this because I'm going to kill this project right after. So I've copied my API URL, and then we need our anonymous key. So anon public, we'll hit copy and paste that over. Beautiful, we'll hit get schema and see what happens. So far nothing. I wonder why. It looks like I've done this correctly because I remember doing this once before. So I'll head back over to table editor and see if by adding a new table, if I can get my original schema to open up. So we'll say users, and we'll say the table that stores all of our users. We'll keep row level security on because it wants us to, and let's just keep everything the same and hit save. All right. So cool, we've added a new table called users. Now let's head back to that original application. Aha, okay, so that worked. So that's the first major difference, is that rather than us creating our schemas from within Flutterflow, if you integrate with Supabase, it's the reverse of that. You're gonna have to go into Supabase first, design out all your tables, all your schemas from Supabase, and then import those schemas back into Flutterflow. So that to me doesn't seem very beginner friendly, right? Because as a beginner, you may not know how to design databases. First of all, it seems like this integration is not very tightly coupled because if things change back here at Supabase, there's no real-time sync between Supabase and Flutterflow. So we're gonna have to keep coming back here to re-get our schema. And this is where those of you who have knowledge in like version control and maintaining different services across parts of the stack where you have an independently operating front end and an independently operating back end, this will be good for those of y'all who know how to manage that. But if you're already thinking about how you're going to manage two separate services, I highly recommend you stay away from Supabase. But that leads me to the next major difference, is that Supabase is a completely different platform. You're working with SQL tables, and SQL is much different than Firebase in that SQL looks like a spreadsheet where you have rows and columns, and in order to look up data in rows and columns, you have to write SQL statements, okay? And so SQL statements essentially are a type of searching language. It's called a query language to be exact. It's not a programming language, but it's a language that you would need to learn in order to query data from Supabase. I haven't recreated my tables here yet, but if I were to show you the major difference in a SQL database and a JSON database is something like this. This is that exact same application that's actually working inside of a Firestore database. And essentially how it works is people ask the AI chef questions, and then the AI chef returns answers. So for each question that's asked to the AI chef, we have a question and the answer. Let me show you how that works. So back here in our home screen, somebody can ask the AI chef what recipes they can make based on what they have in their fridge. So you will type in the ingredients that you have available. We'll make an API call, and then the result of that API call will get saved to the database. And that's exactly what we're saving here. We have tomatoes, pasta, garlic, cream, and sausage, and then we will return the answer of that back into our answer field here. And so this is us creating one document per call to our AI chef. So that's how we would do it here in JSON. So that's how we would do it here in a Firestore database where you have documents that are attached by key value pairs. And if we wanted to do the same thing back over at Supabase, we would want to create a new table. We'll call this questions because that's the same name as the collection there. And we'll say list of question answer pairs asked by the user. We'll hit save. Beautiful. We'll let this get created. And now let's figure out how we could insert that data into Supabase. So we'll first head back to settings. We'll get the schema. Let's see if we can redo this. Now we got questions. Okay. So let's actually get rid of users for now from here. We'll keep it. So now we have questions. And so questions have ID and created at. Okay, we didn't set the shape of questions yet. So let's say we want to change our columns. How would we do that? Maybe we drop this down, hit edit table. We'll go ID. We'll change the shape of the table to say question. And this will be a string type. We'll say text. We'll add another one. We'll say answer. And we'll say text. Boom. Okay, so what I'm noticing that's very different here is that these column types are actually the same column types that a real SQL database would use. So if you are familiar with SQL, this is actually going to give you a lot more control than Firebase. You're going to have more control in the sense of you can actually write real SQL statements here for default values. A lot of the terminology and the mechanics are very similar to SQL, where you can have unique values, nullable values, defined as an array. And you can have very precise control over each type of data that enters your database. And this can be incredibly powerful for those of you who are data junkies, data science backgrounds, business intelligence, business analytics backgrounds, who are very tight about the type of data and the way that you store data. So if you're thinking about, building an application for a data-driven use case, or you're building an application where you're going to be wanting to run queries, complex mathematics, you want to run maybe potentially a data science team on top of that data and have them create queries, then you may want to opt for something like Supabase, where you can actually maintain the same principles as SQL, and that's going to give you a lot more control. Okay, so let's go ahead and create these. We'll hit save. Beautiful, it's doing some work. Fantastic. So our table for questions has been created. We have ID, created at, question, and answer. Now let's head back to Flutterflow and figure out how to save this data. Okay, so to find the action that is actually saving the data to the database, I'm going to head to my bottom sheet, because that's where I actually populate the response of the recipe. I'm going to hit save recipe, and I'm going to find the create document call that's actually created for Firebase, and I'm going to recreate that exact same thing by searching for Supabase insert row, okay, and then I'm going to set the table to questions, and it looks like I set the fields the exact same way, where I'm actually just going to focus on, okay, so it seems like it only knows ID and created at. That's probably because I didn't refresh my schema, and now I have my schema refreshed. So this is something that I'm always going to have to remember if I wanted to work with Supabase, is that anytime I make a change to my Supabase database, I'm going to have to come back to Flutterflow to resync it, which is much different than Firebase in that you're just making the changes out of here. So good heads up. We'll come back to our action flow editor, click edit row, and let's add those fields for question and answer. And then I'm going to map my question and answer to the component variables that I already know about. So I have users ingredients here, which would be the question, and then the answer would be the API's response. Okay, beautiful. Let's resolve some of these bugs. Supabase database invalid for ID. That's probably because I didn't pass an ID here. Let's go random data, random integer. This is definitely not best practice. If you wanted an ID, you would actually want it to auto-generate from here. So let's actually figure out if we can do that first. Okay, so it looks like it will figure that out first. We have default value primary, so it should figure that out. I'm actually just going to get rid of the created at time just to not deal with it. Okay, let's come back to Flutterflow. Let's get rid of the created at, and then the ID. I wonder if we can just remove this. It'd be ideal if we can remove it and let it do its thing on its own. Yes, we can. Okay, beautiful. So we can leave ID alone, and let's go back to our settings and resync our Supabase table. Beautiful, and we should get this error to resolve any second. Collection, new collection currently has no fields. Okay, that was from when I was messing around earlier. So let's go and get rid of this, and we should resolve those bugs. Fantastic. So now I'm going to run this application and see what it's like to insert data into Supabase. Awesome, so after a little wait, we got our API response to show up. I'm going to hit save recipe, and that actually should save some recipes. I do see in the API Explorer here that the request to Supabase did fail. I got a 401 unauthorized. And the message that I can see here in the API call says new row violates row level security policy for table questions. Okay, so that means we need to go check our row level security policy. And essentially what that means is that Supabase allows us to set rules at literally the line by line level of our database. There must be some rule in here that's telling us that we are not authorized to make edits to that table called questions. And this is something I'm actually not sure how to debug. So we're about to find out together. What we'll look at here first is the settings for the table. Aha, and I'm noticing that there is a view policies. And it does seem that no policies are created yet, which could be a problem because that means that no one can access this. So if I click on new policy, it does look like I have two options, get started and a little bit more custom by going full customization. I'm gonna say get started quickly, and it gives us a few options here. Enable read access to everyone, which means that anybody would be able to connect to this database and read. Enable insert access for authenticated users only, which means that only people who are logged into my app would be able to access this database. But that means I'd likely have to use Supabase authentication. So I would actually have to move from Firestore to Supabase authentication because that's the only way Supabase would know if someone's authenticated. I could even do it this way where I can enable access for based on their email. This is cool if you're building a B2B product. I used to build a B2B SaaS company, and only certain types of clients should have been able to access certain databases. For example, I was selling my software to schools, and we only wanted certain school students to access data for that specific school. So like if you were going to Kentucky, you were not able to access University of Florida. So this was actually a row level security implementation that I had to do for my application, but I had to write the code by hand. So to see this as a no code solution is very cool. Okay, so you can do the same thing, delete access for users based on your ID. So you don't want everyone to be able to delete data from databases sometimes. So this could be interesting. And then enable insert access for users based on their user ID. This is cool, especially for people who are like super admins, or you are trusting certain people. For example, like if you are the platform owner, you may want to only give yourself access to certain databases and not everyone else. So for this case, just to get our app working, I'm going to enable read access to everyone. This is kind of like security rules in Firebase, but it's a lot more granular. So we'll go finish set up this policy where we'll leave everything as it is and just let Supabase kind of populate everything. Create policy, enable read access for all users on public questions as permissive for select to public using true. What you see here is an example of a SQL statement. And this goes back to what I mentioned around having to be comfortable looking at SQL clauses and SQL statements. If this is completely gibberish to you and you have no interest in learning it, and you are only trying to use Supabase for, shiny object syndrome, I recommend you walk away now, because in order to be successful with a database like Supabase, you need to be able to roll up your sleeves and look at some of these features, SQL statements, so that you can actually solve problems in the same way that I am right now with y'all. Cool, we'll hit save policy, and now let's go retry that. If we clear our API portal here and hit submit, ideally, when this is done, we should be able to get that recipe back up, hit save, and the API should go through. Okay, so we got the API response, and now it's the moment of truth. I'm going to clear my API portal here, hit save. It looks like we are still not able to get in. Okay, new row violates row level security policy for table questions. Did we do something wrong here? Okay, so we did enable read access for all users, but hey, we didn't enable write access. So that's where we messed up, because we actually can't even write to this table. So what's even the point? Okay, so we have schema public. Let's go back and figure out how to update the policies on the questions table to include write. So we have select, but we don't have insert. So I feel like we're going to have to delete this and do it all over again. Damn. So we deleted that policy, And I'm going to say new policy, get started quickly. We'll say enable read access for everyone, hit use, and then we'll say select and insert. Or let's just say all. Okay, all review. Before I just make the change, I want to understand what the initial SQL statement was. Create policy, policy name on public questions for select. Aha, so I didn't read this statement. It needs to be for select and for insert. So that's where I messed up. Initially, I didn't read the SQL statement. And that's exactly why someone who's inexperienced with SQL could potentially struggle with this. So I'm going to use this template anyways, but I noticed the first time around that we had this field for allowed operation. I'm going to adjust this to all before I go back to review. And now I'm noticing I see as permissive for all, meaning I am able to use all major. So I'm able to use all the major commands. And the major commands in SQL is typically select, insert, update, delete. Those are the four major ones. So it looks like by using the all keyword, I can give a row level policy where anyone can do anything to this database, which is extremely unsafe. But for the sake of getting this to work, we can try it out. Okay, save recipe. Aha, and this time we got a status 201, which means created. Awesome. We look at the response, and it does look like we have ID 3 question and answer returned. If we head back over to Supabase and we look at the table, aha, we do see the data there. So that's awesome. Okay, so the major differences I think we've uncovered is that there's a reverse sync, not a normal sync like there is with Firebase. So you actually have to design the tables in Supabase first and then import them back into Flutterflow and keep resyncing the table every time you make a change. We've also noticed that there is row level security that we have to worry about, and we need to be able to read and make sense of SQL statements when working with Supabase. So again, just to recap this all, if you are in any of those industries that I mentioned, data analytics, data science, business analytics, and you are really good at working with SQL and you're just looking to get into app development for the sake of having a pretty front end, I think Supabase could be for you. Or if you're building an app that's computationally heavy, there's a lot of mathematics or statistics involved, like you're building a sports analytics app or a stock analytics app, then Supabase could potentially be for you. But if you're a beginner and you're building a consumer app or even a lot of B2B apps, you could do really well with Firebase. So I hope this video was helpful and you guys learned something new. If you have any questions about the difference between Firebase and Supabase, feel free to join our free Discord community and be happy to answer any of your questions.